What China has done in the global auto industry is something that, even 100 years from now, historians will still talk about with disbelief. Future generations will ask a simple question: how did one country completely shake the global car market in such a short time? The answer begins with electric vehicles. For the past few years, Chinese electric cars have created a storm across the world. From Europe to the United States, from Asia to the Middle East, Chinese EVs flooded markets that were once dominated by American, European, and Japanese brands. Tesla felt the pressure. European automakers felt the pressure. Legacy car companies around the world felt the pressure. But this was not an accident. This was a calculated strategy. China heavily subsidized electric vehicles. The Chinese government encouraged its population to shift away from gasoline cars and adopt EVs at a national scale. With a population of over 1.4 billion people, China created the largest EV market the world has ever seen. Today, almost every major Chinese city runs on electric mobility. But this created a new problem. If everyone inside China is switching to electric vehicles, what happens to the massive number of gasoline-powered cars already produced? Millions of vehicles, huge inventories, entire factories built for petrol cars. Chinese manufacturers went directly to the top. They told President Xi Jinping, "We have an oversupply. What do we do with these vehicles?" And this is where China made its most aggressive move. First, Chinese companies disrupted global markets with electric vehicles. Then, they did something even more shocking. They exported gasoline cars across the world at nearly half the price of competitors: SUVs, sedans, pickup trucks. Chinese automakers entered markets in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, Asia, and even North America, with prices Western companies simply couldn't match. And here's the most important part. Even after selling cars at half the price, many Chinese companies were still making billions of dollars in profit. Why? Because China works on volume, not margins, low profit per unit, massive scale. This strategy collapsed markets where Japanese and Western brands once dominated. Countries that used to rely on Toyota, Ford, GM, BMW, and Volkswagen suddenly saw Chinese alternatives offering more features, longer warranties, and lower prices. When demand started rising, China doubled down. More capital, more brands, better quality, stronger warranties, and these weren't export-only models. These were the same vehicles used by Chinese consumers, built to high domestic standards. The Chinese state backed the industry fully. Factories that were struggling suddenly found global buyers. Chinese leadership personally engaged with world governments, asking them to allow Chinese vehicles into their markets. Even when tariffs were imposed on Chinese EVs in Europe and the US, the damage was already done. A Chinese electric car today often costs half of a Tesla, while offering more features. Ironically, Tesla itself depends heavily on Chinese supply chains, from batteries to components. China didn't stop at EVs. It moved aggressively into gasoline vehicles as well. Why? Because outside China, the global reality is different. For at least the next 10 to 15 years, gasoline cars will still dominate many regions. China understood this before anyone else. What was supposed to be old stock clearance turned into a new wave of demand. Orders poured in. Factories that were meant to shut down received even more production requests. Chinese companies studied Western designs, improved them, added features, cut costs, and delivered cars at half the price. Now, even luxury segments are being targeted. Brands like Mercedes, BMW, and high-end performance automakers are no longer untouchable. Meanwhile, Europe faces rising energy costs due to geopolitical decisions. Manufacturing has become expensive. Cost of living is rising. Factories are struggling to stay competitive. China's argument is simple. Let the market decide. Let consumers choose. If Chinese cars are cheaper and high quality, people will buy them. If Western products are better, they will survive. Competition benefits consumers, not corporations. And that's the reality shaking the global auto industry today. China is now the world's largest EV producer, a rising gasoline vehicle exporter, a dominant force in global manufacturing. And the rest of the world is still asking the same question: how did this happen so fast? So the real question is no longer whether China has won parts of the global auto market. The real question is, what happens next? For decades, the United States, Europe, and Japan believed they would always control global manufacturing. They believed innovation belonged only to them, that low-cost production could never match high-quality engineering. China proved them wrong, not with speeches, not with threats, but with factories, scale, and strategy. This wasn't just about cars, this was about how modern power is built. In the 21st century, dominance doesn't come from armies alone. It comes from supply chains, from control over batteries, raw materials, factories, and logistics. China didn't ask for permission. It prepared quietly. While others debated policy, China built capacity. While others raised prices, China lowered costs. While others focused on short-term profits, China played the long game. And now, the world is adjusting to a new reality. Consumers are choosing affordability. Governments are struggling to respond. Legacy brands are being forced to adapt or disappear. This is not the end of competition. This is the beginning of a new era. An era where the rules of the global market are being rewritten. An era where manufacturing power decides economic power. And the biggest lesson for the United States and the rest of the world is simple. Ignore long-term strategy, and someone else will write the future for you. History won't remember who complained the most. History will remember who built the most.